what makes a video game good? Video games are a massive undertaking to create. From controls, to graphics, to gameplay, to menus, to music, and everything in between. But what makes them good? Is it the individual elements, or the accumulation of those elements that come together to make something complete? I don't really have an answer for that. Because to be frank, what makes a video game good is different for everybody. For some, it may be the graphics above all. For some, they don't give one iota of thought to the graphics and just want a fun story. And each of those people has a very loud opinion and criticism as to what they want to see changed or updated in a video game. So let's talk about video game criticism, how we should and shouldn't critique video games, and how to be more effective in our arguments in order to make them clearer and more persuasive. As you can see from the title, the focus of today's video will be on EA UFC 5. However, the general concept can really apply to any game, especially those with an online or competitive focus. UFC 5 released for early access on October 23rd, 2023. Since then, there has been a flurry of reception, feedback, and criticism, as there always is and will be with the UFC franchise and with sports franchises in general. Some of it has been positive, some of it has been negative, and I don't care which is which, because the effectiveness of the argument is what's most important. Without an effective critique, it falls on deaf ears because it cannot be articulated well enough to be used in any meaningful manner. So, let's talk about ineffective ways that we as players tend to criticize video games, and how to make these criticisms much more practical. The first thing that must be addressed is the question of scale. While it feels great to make broad, sweeping critiques about a video game in general, when it comes to a competitive game like EA UFC 5, which is expected to be getting constant updates for a year or more, specificity is king. The reason for this is that the biggest changes that can occur in a franchise are going to happen in between the series. New game modes, updated animations, new mechanics, crossplay. These are things that are implemented between games, not necessarily in patches or free updates. This is because the development cycle is most prominent and active in between the games, so that the team can truly make a new experience. After the game launches, and especially after the first couple of months, development resources tend to peter out over time. For that reason, blanket statements like, "give us a new career mode," or "implement a brand new clinch system," aren't effective criticisms or suggestions during a game's life cycle. These are things that can be suggested for the next iteration of the franchise, but that's really all. It's extremely difficult to add these things in updates, and therefore it's ineffective to request them as updates to the game. The solution to this problem is clear. When criticizing a video game for the purpose of getting it updated within the game's development cycle, one must first question if their suggestion could be reasonably implemented within the game's lifespan. Tuning, a new strike, a new fighter model, these are things that can be changed in a game's cycle. New modes, new mechanics, new fighting positions, these are things that are probably going to be saved for a new iteration of the game. An easy test for if your suggestion is feasible is to see if something similar has been previously implemented in an update. New fighters, models, a new animation, a new strike, these are all things that have been added in updates to previous entries in the franchise. So, if you see something that has been added before, or your criticism and or suggestion seems to be of similar scale to something that has been done before, that is something that should be suggested to improve the game during its development cycle. In looking at recent critiques of UFC 5, a trend that seems to emerge with many things that people tend to suggest is a lack of specificity. Pressure is too strong, grappling isn't good, the clinch sucks. These are examples of vague analysis, and they are exactly the wrong kind of feedback that a player should give. Let me explain. When you say something like, for example, pressure is too strong to the developers, that can mean one of 100 things. It could mean that advancing footwork is too fast, that punches do too much damage to the block, that there is too much stamina, that head movement doesn't work properly, that there are tracking issues on the back foot, or any number of other things. What this does is overload the people making these decisions with information, and not allow them to pinpoint the actual issue at hand. That means that the criticism gets thrown out, because you can't just throw your hands up in the air and say, "we'll fix it," as a developer. You need to be able to fix specific things with identifiable issues. What this means is that when we give a critique, we need to identify the underlying issue. Instead of saying that grappling isn't good, we narrow down what we find not good about it. For example, let's say that I find grappling to be boring because there is too much stalling. That's a better critique, but it's still not quite there. What you're looking to do when you offer criticism for something to be updated in a patch is focus in on a specific mechanic or piece of tuning that can be changed or updated. So the next question you ask is why something isn't working for you. Why is there too much stalling in the grappling? Well, it's because people have a tendency to sit around and wait to deny transitions, and after they deny one transition, they get an advantage. So all of a sudden, the solution becomes very clear. We need to make it less punishing if you get one transition denied, so that you can still move after that happens. And when we ask how we do that, we get to the criticism we actually want to give. I find that grappling is too much of a stalling game, and that means that we need to remove negative grapple advantage so that when you get denied, you still have a chance at escaping that position. Notice how we took an incredibly vague and general critique, grappling isn't good, to a specific mechanic that should be changed. Negative GA needs to be removed. This is the process that everybody should go through when deciding how to critique a game. Something that is extremely easy to do when critiquing a video game is to rely on your own perception and experience of what happened to determine that something needs fixing or did not work properly. Someone gets spammed by jabs on UFC 5, so they go into the official UFC Discord. They type out a paragraph about how OP jabs are, they submit, nothing gets done. Why is this? Well, it's because no proper evidence was used. Despite what it may seem at an initial thought, first-hand experience and account is not necessarily a great tool for giving feedback when it comes to balancing a game. This is because without the added context of what actually happened in and out of the game, a person can't truly be objective about what needs to be done. Therefore, if a piece of criticism is submitted without evidence attached, it's easy to disregard because there was not a proper amount of context. What this means is that when submitting criticism or feedback, the player must collect as much evidence as possible. More importantly, this evidence should be replicable. What I mean by that is that the issue at hand should be something that can be consistently replicated. This is for two reasons. The first is that being able to replicate it means that the issue actually exists on a large scale. It isn't a temporary bug or an issue of skill, but an actual problem with the game that must be addressed. The second reason is so that the issue can be fixed. Without the developers being able to narrow down on the issue at hand because they can't actually find it in the code, they're never going to be able to fix it. So, when you are submitting criticism as a player, ensure as best as you can that you attach proper evidence and that the issue is replicable. One of the biggest balancing acts for a developing team is the different requests from the very distinct communities that emerge out of playing the game. In UFC 5, there's the simulation community, the casual community, the competitive community, the created fighter community, and more. For that reason, when you are a part of just one of those communities, it's easy to call for all of the things that your community wants to be fixed, without considering that you are only one part of a much larger picture. That means that you send all of the feedback that you want fixed, from the massive things that you consider to be game-breaking to the tiny, minute fixes that you didn't even notice until somebody on Twitter pointed it out. The reason that this is a mistake is because it doesn't allow for a proper separation of priorities. When you clamor for everything under the sun to be fixed, without understanding that only a limited amount of things can be done in between patches, you really clamor for nothing to be fixed. As players, it's important to understand what is a priority in getting something to be fixed, and what would be nice to be changed or updated, but in reality could easily take a backseat to more pressing issues. For this reason, in order to effectively get the most pressing issues taken care of, one must understand what the priority fixes are. The easiest way to determine this is figuring out what people in general get frustrated about most often in the game. The things that bother the most people most frequently are the things that you're going to want to be fixed first. This way, you can send in your feedback as the most pressing issues, and then as those get resolved, move on to more minor things. This avoids the possibility of cramming everything together and not getting things fixed in the way that you want them to. As an example, there was a lot of clamoring for new fighters to be put into UFC 5. However, despite EA telling players multiple times that new fighters take 4 to 6 weeks to add and can only be added 2 to 3 times a month, we constantly see people asking for 10, 20, or even 30 fighters at a time. What this does is make it so that nobody understands who you actually want to be put in the game, because you're just yelling into the void about all the missing fighters. Instead, look at the rankings, the popularity, how long fighters have been missing from the game, and how badly you want them, and ask for 1 or 2 at a time depending on those factors. This will make it much more effective as an argument. There are 2 main avenues of creating a piece of feedback to send to developers. The first, and probably the less productive of the 2, is creating a piece of feedback that is really meant for your personal benefit or enjoyment. There is certainly nothing wrong with creating this feedback, and it absolutely has its place. However, the reason that this is a less effective argument than the other avenue is that it isn't something that developers are going to find priority in, as the specific feedback could very well be something that only a couple of people are requesting. This doesn't mean that it shouldn't be sent in, but it does mean that large amounts of this type of feedback could easily overload the developers with too many requests, to the point that it's very difficult to distinguish what the most popular ones are. The second avenue, and the much more efficacious one, is creating a piece of feedback based on an examination of overall community wants and values. Now, as mentioned previously, this is still going to most likely be contained to the community that you as a player are a part of. But that isn't necessarily a bad thing, as it still represents a large population of people that play the game and have a good amount of investment in it. For that reason, it goes back to the idea of priority. Because there are many people with the same feedback, it is something that can be easily shared, expanded upon, and made into a large and comprehensive piece of criticism that can be understood by the developers and executives who make the game. Now, unfortunately, this is a much more serious and pressing issue, and it's one that has become more and more common in the online gaming sphere. It is all too easy for people to sit behind a screen and hurl insults and attacks at the companies and people behind the game. And I understand if you are frustrated at the past or current doings of a company. However, time and time again, we see people so beyond mad that the pixels in their video game aren't aligned the way they want them to be that they start threatening people. They post pictures of developers online. They endlessly inundate the top content creators of the game with mocking nicknames. They go after EA employees who don't even develop the game, but just interact with the community because it's their job. And not only is this ridiculous and unacceptable, but it's even extremely ineffective. Notwithstanding the fact that attacking somebody personally is completely unacceptable, I don't understand why anybody thinks that attacking somebody is going to motivate them to do what you want. If you do this, shame on you, and there is a better way to go about it. What gamers need to understand is that developers are people. Behind that multi-billion-dollar company, the suits and executives are regular people who graduated from college with a passion and a dream for developing video games, that got the opportunity of their lives to work on a AAA video game. And they are incredibly passionate about that stuff. Anybody who's been in the EA UFC Discord has probably seen Altair Snake or Skynet from the EA UFC development team interacting in there, not because it's their job, just because it's what they want to do. Tappersnap hosted a 19-page Q&A on the Operation Sports forums because he wanted to interact with the community. When the community comes together and actually treats the developers with respect, engaging with them and using the strategies I've highlighted above to create an effective argument as to what they want changed, they are able to make these things happen. The beauty of video game criticism is that it proves just how passionate a player base can be. We do truly care about the games that we play, not just because we spend money on them, but because we recognize them as works of art and hard labor by hundreds, if not thousands, of people with genuine passion for the art form. However, we as players can and should do better. If we expect to play a genuine process in the formulation and updating of video games, then we should be expected to understand how to properly give feedback to these games. For that reason, I hope that this video helped you to do so. If it did, please let me know in the comment section below, and I will see you guys for the next one.